Trump shouted at the very start, his voice cutting through the moderator's words like a blade.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
The eruption was not only aimed at the journalist on stage, but at the entire audience watching at home. It was interruption as domination, a calculated strike to unsettle the rhythm before it could even form. The hall froze for a breath, and the cameras swayed toward him, catching the scowl, the jut of his chin, the force of his glare. He wanted control, and for a moment he held it. Crockett replied with a stillness that cut deeper than noise. She locked her eyes forward, refused to blink, and spoke with a deliberate cadence.
They are. But the reality is that we need to start speaking more truth if we are really going to get to the real power. And if we don't recognize the full history, then we are doomed to repeat it. And frankly, this is a guy that is trying to do everything.
The pause that followed her words was more dangerous than any shout. 12 seconds ticked by, each one measured and heavy, until the counterattack struck. The room shifted. The audience recognized what had just happened. His interruption had not silenced her. It had sharpened her blade. The duel had begun not with policy details or scripted lines, but with a test of will. Trump had lunged forward, attempting to overwhelm with sheer force, but Crockett turned his noise into her stage. She made the interruption itself the evidence of his fear. Viewers at home saw arrogance exposed by composure. What began as a roar collapsed into silence, and in that silence, she planted her first flag. Trump clenched his jaw, his hand tightening on the lectern, his body restless under the glare of the stage lights. He shot back with another blow, recycling a familiar insult, this time aimed directly at her identity.
A new person named Crockett. I watched her speak the other day. She's definitely a low IQ person.
The words came out sharp but hollow, like a weapon used too many times. Some in the audience laughed nervously, but others groaned. His arsenal was showing its rust. The insult revealed nothing new, only the emptiness behind the volume. Crockett refused to flinch. She countered with history, turning his dismissal into an indictment that went beyond the stage and back into the foundation of his empire. Her voice did not rise. It grounded itself in cold fact.
Other was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and helped his daddy in the family business. Housing discrimination, that is.
The words landed like a hammer. She pulled his biography into the light, threading it with accusations of systemic abuse, of power inherited not earned, of sins that lingered long after the applause of wealth faded. The crowd's energy surged, the kind of reaction that no campaign handler could contain. Applause clashed with jeers, but the tide was unmistakable. She had seized the moment. The contrast was cinematic. Gold cufflinks glinted on his wrists, symbols of wealth and power, while her words painted them as relics of privilege and corruption. The camera's red tally light blinked steadily, an unblinking witness to his unraveling. Donors in the front row exchanged nervous glances, campaign aides scribbled furious notes, and producers behind the curtain shouted to camera operators to keep rolling. This was no longer debate, it was theater, and Crockett had become the director. As Trump tried again to force his presence across the room, his voice grew louder, his words less coherent. Each interruption now carried the weight of desperation rather than dominance. Crockett, however, kept her rhythm. She pulled the lens wider, weaving policy into conflict, speaking of Social Security, veterans' care, and disaster relief. Her anchors were simple, almost musical. You paid in. You earned it. It's your money. The repetition drew applause lines, the kind that ripple outward and echo beyond the room into news feeds and living rooms across the country. But beyond the applause, something else was shifting. Backstage, phones buzzed with frantic text messages. Aides typed orders. Kill post-show gaggle. Producers mouthed to one another. This is the clip. Donors scribbled new strategies in the margins of their notes. Every second of the 12-second reversal was already being clipped, packaged, and scheduled for distribution. Push alerts were primed. Headlines were half-written. The interruption that was meant to prove his dominance had instead become her weapon. The air thickened with consequence. Trump tried to pivot, muttering about fake news, jabbing at moderators, grasping for another line of attack. But the more he spoke, the smaller his frame appeared against the enormity of the moment he had created for her. Crockett did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply pressed forward, her composure more cutting than any insult. Each line she delivered felt less like an argument and more like a verdict. I described it all as though guiding the viewer through a trial, because that is what it had become. Evidence laid bare, testimony delivered, the jury not of 12 but of millions watching from home, the cuffs of his sleeves, the restless shuffling of papers, the shifting of weight behind the lectern. Every detail symbolized collapse. Crockett's lines echoed as statements of record, not just rhetoric. She was not debating, she was prosecuting. And yet the story did not end in that moment. What began with one interruption and one 12-second pause had already spiraled into something larger. This was no longer a clash between two people. It was a collision of forces, arrogance against resolve, privilege against truth, spectacle against history. The crowd roared again, and Trump, red-faced, barked back words drowned by the noise. He had lost control not only of the stage, but of the narrative. I left the viewers with a final image for this act. The silence just before the applause broke. The hush of the hall before the eruption. It was in that silence, not the noise, that the power shifted. Crockett had turned his interruption into her platform, his insult into her evidence, his dominance into her weapon. And as the cameras panned across the hall, as editors cued their headlines, as donors reconsidered their bets, one truth was undeniable. The battle had only begun.